Headshot.
Ooh, great essence of infinite. Oh my god, we just one-tapped that guy with Sparrow Volley. That rare got killed by my clearing skill. Alright, build works. Build works very well. And we can do double damage once we get our next ascendancy. Hey, what's up guys, JayTX here. This is going to be the update video to the League Star Bleepo character that we've been playing. So far, we hit level 73 yesterday, and we just got into maps. I've been asked a few times on stream on how to actually level the character itself, and how to actually transition the build from the Lightning Arrow playstyle from Act 1 and 2 to the start of Act 3 where you switch to Rain of Arrows, and then into Act 5 where you switch to Sparrow Volley. So I'll quickly talk about the really key pieces of gear that are really good for the leveling process. At level 16, you get access to a bow called Splinter Heart. It's a really good physical damage bow with an extra tag of projectile splitting towards 2 targets. Make sure obviously you quality and add rune sockets to this. When you get to level 39, you get access to a new bow called Sliver Tongue. It's also an incredibly good physical damage based bow. These 2 bows will take you throughout the whole entire campaign. I use the Sliver Tongue all the way until the end of Act 6. The other core piece of gear is a Edrin's Tusks. It gives you a 50% chance to bleed from level 11. It's incredibly powerful for when you transition into the Rain of Arrows bleed setup. And combined with a Lacerate, you get a 100% chance to bleed very early on. And I'll talk about some changes to the tree when you actually are leveling. So let me jump into PoE here. So Path of Building has been updated to the new tree, as well as the new skill gems and as well as the new gear. I'll briefly touch on some of the changes from the League Star PoE to the one we have now. With the new peak tree, we have a little damage wheel here early on, so Primal Sundering is really good in Act 1 because it just gives us easy access to elemental damage while we are still using Lightning Rod, Lightning Arrow. In Act 2, there's more elemental damage here and also just generic attack damage down here. So we're just pretty much scaling as much damage as possible early on in the tree. And then at Act 3 is when you swap into the Rain of Arrows. So this is where you unallocate your elemental damage nodes and start taking the physical attack damage nodes. And we path down here for the Incision wheel. Incision is a pretty interesting mechanic in the fact that it's actually very good for builds that hit frequently and keep reapplying bleeds, but not so good for builds that hit one big bleed or just hit targets once to try get a big bleed. In our case, this is very good early on for leveling because Rain of Arrows hits so many times. The main thing that you get from Incision is you can apply a bleed and an Incision at the same time, and because your Rain of Arrows hits so frequently, with the 20% and 20% chance here to inflict Incision, you get a 30% increased magnitude to bleeding against enemies affected by Incision. So this is actually a huge amount of bleed magnitude early on, and then you also take these nodes that give you additional physical damage taken and a chance to apply 10 Incision stacks, which is the max. Combined with this, you also take Crimson Assault. This is incredibly strong early on because it just gives you a free source of aggravate, but it does reduce your base bleeding down to 1 second. This doesn't really matter for us because Rain of Arrows keeps reapplying bleed so frequently that we get to fully benefit from the double damage of the aggravate, and it's incredibly powerful combined with Incision together. As well, you take the DOT nodes up here, and then towards Act 4, you start going down here to take more bleed nodes and more DOT. When you do swap into Act 5, you get your Sparrow Volley. So this is when you drop your Crimson Assault, you drop your Incision because you're no longer using Rain of Arrows and you're not hitting so fast. This is when the build really starts to pop up because Sparrow Volley is an incredible clearing skill. Combine that with the new Herald of Blood skill gem, you're going to have a really good time clearing packs in maps. The main thing to note when you do swap into Sparrow Volley is around Act 5, you won't have 100 Spirit yet, so you need to drop one of your auras. So I dropped Herald of Blood and picked up Combat Frenzy. Combat Frenzy is a must because that's the only way you're going to generate Frenzy Charges, and Frenzy Charges is what you need to make your Sparrow Volley do insane damage. So make sure you take a Combat Frenzy with Profusion. You can either choose to drop Herald of Blood or Wind Dancer. I kept Wind Dancer because the defensive layer is really important for us early on, especially combined with Blind. And make sure you take a Pin Lockdown setup onto your default bow shot. You can also add Scattershot as well if you have the gem link, but just having this allows you to set up your combat frenzies to generate when you pin a target, and then Spiral Volley lets you just dump absolute damage on enemies. So going into day 1 discoveries for what we found out about Bleed, there are some pretty interesting new gems that we can use. One of the ones I think that has insane potential is Concoct. Now this is a gem that takes some of your life flask, but gives you more bleeding magnitude per life flask charge consumed. So what this essentially means is, if you have a life flask like this with 121 charges, it takes 20% of the 121, so this results in 72% more bleeding magnitude. Obviously the trade-off is you're going to be using your life flask in fights, but you don't want to be sniping that frequently anyway because you'll be relying on Spiral Volley in maps. But this is just a insane gem that I think is very, very powerful for bleed because it literally just almost doubles your bleed magnitude on your hits. Other gems that are pretty interesting are Perfection. This is a very high skill cap gem which incentivizes players to hit snipes consistently. If you miss a snipe, you lose your Perfection. But if you keep hitting snipes, it's a 20% more damage buff, not only on your snipe, but on all your skills, including Spiral Volley or any other attack that you do. Another gem to talk about is Alignment. I mentioned this in the pre-patch video. This essentially gives you 30% more damage if you face the direction of where the arrow tells you to. So if I pop it into my build, it doesn't matter which setup I put it in. Once you put it into your build, you get a little arrow on your character. So you have to attack in this direction in order to get the bonus from Alignment. The interesting thing about this though, for Spiral Volley, because we shoot in a circle either way, if you just face your character towards the direction, you get the 30% bonus and you still get the coverage of Spiral Volley. And you know you've been successful with the alignment is when the arrow changes. So if I point it this way, the arrow doesn't change. Point it this way, it doesn't change. I point it this way, and I shoot, arrow changes, it means it was successful. I wouldn't recommend doing this early on in the acts because there are some better, more consistent damage links. But I think in the end game, when you do get your 4th and 5th, maybe 6th links, this is a really, really powerful support gem. Another question I've been asked is other ways of generating frenzy charges. So I've been looking into this, and one of the ways I found is with this new charm called Valako's Roar. So when you take lightning damage from a hit, you get a frenzy charge on use. But because lightning damage is very inconsistent in this game, and when you do get hit, it won't always be lightning, how do you make this a little bit more consistent? There are certain ways like this, so Catalysis, where 5% of physical damage from hits is taken as a random element, so that chooses between fire, lightning, cold. So pretty much this would mean a third of the time when you do get hit by any attack, you will be proccing that charm because you're taking lightning damage and then you get frenzy charges. And this way of gaining frenzy charges also has a chance to proc your Deadeye Ascendancy, which gives you up to your maximum charges, so a 30% chance, then a 35% chance if you take this node here. So when you get hit, there's also a 35% chance you gain up to your maximum frenzy charges on top of you generating frenzy charges yourself. I think between that and just having your regular setup, you should have pretty good uptime with your frenzies, especially once you get a Serpent's Egg, which gives you an additional charge when you gain a charge. This is one of the ways I think you can sustain frenzies early on. Later on, there might be some more cool techs that we discover, but this is what I found out so far on day 1 and day 2. I'll quickly talk about my gear as well right now. So this is just getting into early maps. So I just got into maps yesterday, and so I managed to roll a pretty decent bow. The name of the game is once you finish your acts, the main amount of money you want to be spending on is on your bow. Getting a high physical bow is really important. Also note that now there are greater iron runes, so these are a bit stronger than your regular iron runes. They're 25% increased damage per rune opposed to 15. So make sure when you do get a decent bow, you socket those in. Quiver, also really important. Getting a serrated quiver gives us 15% chance to cause bleeding, and then we scale that with the quiver effect nodes. This lets you drop your Edrin's Tusks, that gives 50%, and then you can just get a different chest piece like this, a high life, double res chest piece, spirits not really necessary. This will bring your bleed chance up pretty high, and then you can cap out the rest of your bleed chance with jewels on your tree. So just look for jewels with just bleed on hit, bleed magnitude. I haven't changed all my jewels yet, but once I do, I'll be pretty much capped out on my bleed chance. Another cool thing we discovered is there are these new talismans that have come out. This is a wolf talisman. They can be socketed into gloves. Each one of these gives 10% increased magnitude of bleeding, which is pretty damn insane, especially if you corrupt a pair of gloves and you get 2 sockets. So that's 20% increased magnitude of bleeding straight away on your gloves. My character is still really early on into the progression. I still am missing 2 ascendancy points, so I don't have the double effect of frenzies yet, and I don't have my point blank node. Both of those would give a huge amount of damage to the build. As you can already see earlier in the clips in the video, I'm already hitting quite hard. When I get those ascendancy nodes, I'll be more than doubling my damage, so you can kind of see how crazy this build ramps up. I'm also missing a frenzy charge on the tree. So there's a lot of upgrades for this character to do. Hopefully you guys had a good time with the league start. Hopefully this video helps you if you are still in the acts and you're trying to level up on what to actually get for your gear and also how your skill tree and gems should be looking. I am streaming live daily at twitch.tv/JayTX. Please stop by if you have any questions. I've been having a lot of fun in the league so far. I know there's a lot of negative sentiment about how the gameplay currently feels, but I feel quite positive because our build actually feels quite nice. It hasn't been affected that much by the nerfs, as to speak. And we're having a good time in map. As always, thank you guys so much for watching the video and supporting the stream, and I will catch you guys in the next one.